Hello, I'm Eric Corman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime Webinars. We started this series 5 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's webinar is on Universal Design for Learning, UDL, in introduction. Universal Design for Learning is an educational framework based on research in learning sciences, including cognitive neuroscience, that guides the development of flexible learning environments that can accommodate individual learning differences by anticipating barriers within the environment, including the curriculum, and planning for them in advance. It recognizes each student learns in a unique manner and offers flexible ways to learn and multiple ways to meet expectations. It empowers teachers to think differently about their practice and focuses on educational outcomes for all, including students with disabilities. Our presenter today is Diana Marker, Director of School Services at the Washington State Charter Schools Association. She will provide an overview of Universal Design for Learning and answer your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is a space for you to submit questions to us. During the presentation, we'll reference a few polls. Like the Q&A function, the poll function is also at the bottom of your screen. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function, also on the bottom of your screen, or at info@educationvoters.org. Diana Marker serves as the Director of School Services at the Washington State Charter Schools Association. Prior to joining WA Charters, Diana was the Assistant Director of the True Measure Collaborative, a special education collaborative, which offers compliance support and training in inclusive practices to member charter schools in Washington State. Diana earned her Master of Education Policy from the University of Washington. She began her career as a special education teacher and is committed to supporting equitable, high-quality education. Welcome, Diana.
Thanks, Eric. And welcome to this introduction of Universal Design for Learning. As Eric mentioned, my name is Diana Marker with WA Charters, and I have had the privilege of studying Universal Design for Learning since 2015. Last year, I was lucky enough to join them for the Presenters Academy, and they've been very generous with their materials. So much of what I'm presenting to you today comes directly from them. Here are some of the sources that I use most heavily in this presentation. Universal Design for Learning, Theory and Practice, which is a free digital book, and CAST's website. At the end of the presentation, I'll be sharing digital sources with you directly. So let's preview the agenda for today. First, we are going to go over an introduction to universal design and learner variability. Then we'll be looking at the UDL framework, followed by learning about learning neural networks, and we'll leave some time for questions and answers. So this is going to be about a 45-minute road trip with me. Our learning objectives are to have participants gain a basic understanding of the framework of Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and gain an understanding of the neural networks that are involved in learning. So before we get too deep into this, I'd like to know, get a feel for how familiar the audience is with Universal Design for Learning. So we're launching a poll, and on a scale of 1 to 5, please let us know how familiar you are with Universal Design for Learning, with 1 being not familiar and 5 being extremely familiar. Fantastic. Thank you for participating. For those of you who were able to take the poll, it seems like we have an audience that's fairly familiar with Universal Design for Learning, so that's great. And I believe we just shared the results.
All right.
Okay. as Eric shared in the introduction, Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is an educational framework based on research and learning sciences, including cognitive neuroscience that guides the development of flexible learning environments to accommodate individual learning differences. We're going to quickly look at some innovations that have been created to provide access to the environment that have proven to be beneficial for all. So moving counterclockwise, in the top left, you see closed captioning. This was developed for a very specific community, those who are deaf or hard of hearing, but it's beneficial to a much broader range of people. People at the gym use this function. People in loud restaurants use this function. Parents during nap time might use this function to keep up with Netflix and keep the house quiet. In the bottom left, we have a ramp. This is necessary for individuals with physical disabilities that makes stairs difficult or impossible, but it's beneficial to a larger group. Lots of people use strollers and need to use the ramp. Delivery people might need to take carts or dollies up a ramp. So it has implications for the broader community. In the bottom right, we have a curb cut with tactile paving. This is used in crosswalks to make them accessible for both those with a physical impairment, but also the tactile paving makes it accessible to those who are visually impaired. This is also beneficial to people using strollers or carts or bicycles. It makes the crosswalk more visible to drivers as well because of the tactile paver is easier to see.
I was wondering about those bumps. I've seen them all over, but I never knew why.
Yeah. And then in the top right, we have a tech issue. Hold on one second. In the top right, we have speech to text, predictive text, and text to speech. Hey Siri, read me that text. This technology was originally created for individuals with disability, and it was super expensive technology. But now it's something that nearly everyone uses on a daily basis. Eric, have you used these functions?
I use them all the time. Thank you.
So you might be surprised to learn that universal design has its roots in architecture. Architect Ron Mace was a North Carolina State University architect student, and he proposed the idea of integrating supports for everyone from the inception of the design of a building. He was practically laughed out of the profession, but eventually his ideas caught fire, and now it's standard practice in architecture, which is universal design. Now, the images that we see here are similar. They're two ramps. The ramp on the left is thoughtfully designed, while the ramp on the right is a retrofit. And this is important because it's an afterthought. And we want to design to the edges from the beginning of the design process in education rather than retrofitting our curriculum. So Ron Mace said, consider the broadest possible range of users from the beginning. And this helps us avoid a retrofit or an afterthought. So that brings us to the first core concept of UDL. What is necessary for some is beneficial for everyone. We need to consider the needs of the broadest range of users from the design. Just like with architecture, we want to avoid retrofitting a curriculum. So we're going to start talking about learner variability now. And to do that, we're going to do a quick activity. And we'll follow the prompts of this video.
Okay, here we go. Uh-oh, Let me back that up again. Get that to start.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted. It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VisCog Productions. Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Great, thanks, Eric. So we're going to launch a quick poll now as well. Oops.
Okay, and hang on. There we go. Relaunch polling. Go to the next poll.
We are just trying to find the question in the poll.
That's the first poll. We want to get to the second poll. Ah, there it is.
Great. So you're being told to let us know if you saw the gorilla. And there are a few options here. Yes, I saw the gorilla and I've seen this experiment before. Yes, I've never seen this experiment before. And no, I was focused on counting. Okay, we'll go ahead and end polling and share. We have a wide range of answers in this group as well. So for the first time that I was asked to watch this video, I did not see the gorilla. So I related to that number 3 option of no, I was focused on counting. And many people, this is a famous experiment, so many people have seen versions of this experiment before. And if you've seen it before, you're more likely to see the gorilla. People who see this for the first time are more or less likely to see the gorilla depending on their individual differences in working memory, motivation, previous history, and lots of other factors. It's a powerful display of human variability. In this case, the variability is evident in the attention or engagement. What you see and learn from is not differentiated just by your visual or perceptual systems, but by an affective system which is engaging us. All right, well, thank you for taking the time to do that with us. So when we're talking about brain variability, I like to use this example. Researchers have explored the physiological differences in how brains of individuals with autism differ from those who are not diagnosed. So individuals with and without autism were asked to take the Raven's progressive matrices. The Raven's progressive matrices is a nonverbal assessment that tests fluid intelligence. Test takers are asked to make meanings of patterns. So overall, there was very little difference in parts of the brain, except in the area of the complex visual cortex, which is highlighted in yellow. Now, they measured brain activity using fMRI and PET scans. So I'm going to show you what a question on the RPM might look like. So this is a sample from the test, and you would be asked to complete the pattern. The highlighted portion in yellow does not indicate damage or dysfunction. In fact, people with autism generally show superior performance in this task. So it's not a disability, it's a variability. Researchers at CAST, led by Dr. Todd Rose, have identified 3 dimensions of systematic variability that will exist in every learning environment at every age. Differences in the way that people receive information, differences in the way that they engage with the material, and differences in the way that they can act upon the material and show what they know. So this leads us to our next core concept. Variability is predictable. If we can predict variability, then we can design lessons for the broadest range of users. This predictability has led to the UDL guidelines and framework. So let's go ahead and talk about the UDL framework. The goal of Universal Design for Learning is to eliminate barriers. It seeks to illuminate the barriers from the inception of a lesson plan. UDL maximizes the 3 networks in the brain that allow groups of learners the flexibility of taking in information in a way that is unique to their individual needs. The barrier is in the environment, not in the learner. And the barrier, the environment, could include curriculum. So we need to stop trying to change students and start looking at the environment. So the process for UDL is kind of simple. You set clear, rigorous, and relevant goals. You anticipate the barriers by thinking about learner variability. And then you design options to reduce barriers for all. Here's an example looking at a goal and clarifying expectations. The first goal says students will write a 5-paragraph essay describing phases of butterfly metamorphosis. If I told you this was a science goal, and I, as a science teacher, need to know if my students understand the phases of the butterfly, I might have a barrier with that 5-paragraph essay. So I would reframe that goal to be students will demonstrate an understanding of the phases of the butterfly metamorphosis. And then I might provide options for students to show me what they know, which could include a 5-paragraph essay. But it could also include making a cartoon or making a video for me. So it's really about clarifying goals and expectations. This leads us to our next core concept. UDL seeks to anticipate barriers within the design of the lesson to maximize flexibility to provide access for all learners. You'll notice throughout this part of the presentation, I have some images to help us track the neural networks that I'm going to talk about in the next section. So I've tried to incorporate those within each section, so you'll have a pictorial representation of each network. The goal of UDL guidelines is to create expert learners. By providing multiple means of engagement, we create expert learners who are purposeful and motivated. By providing multiple means of representation, we create expert learners who are resourceful and knowledgeable. And by providing multiple means of action, and expression, we create expert learners who are strategic and goal-oriented. The three primary classes of the learning neural networks are affective networks, recognition networks, and strategic networks. Affective networks monitor internal and external environments to set priorities, to motivate and engage the learner. Recognition networks, that sense is where you sense and perceive information in the environment and transform it into usable knowledge. And strategic networks are those that plan, organize, and initiate purposeful actions in the environment.
I noticed the cerebral cortex was highlighted in that last one.
Yeah.
That's where you really do your high-level thinking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this all together, this is the UDL framework guidelines. And if you just glance at it, it looks like a lot. But within each category, there are checkpoints that have strategies attached to them. And within the digital resources that I've linked at the end, I encourage you to go into this. It's interactive, and you can click on any of the checkpoints and dig into both the research that led them to add these strategies and then strategies that you can start to try to incorporate. So we're going to kind of dig into each of the networks a little bit, starting with the affective neural networks. Affective networks are specialized. They're composed of many parts that serve a really specific purpose, including the amygdala, which is where what controls our fear. Certain stimuli can initiate powerful feelings of fear. The amygdala relies on the cerebral cortex to evaluate information as threatening or benign. Bidirectionality in the nervous system suggests that emotion and cognition are completely intertwined, and we can't separate them. It's impractical. And I think about when I was a child, I was very nervous about reading, and it affected my comprehension. So, you know, I can see the applications of this when I think back to my own learning.
So this is basically the fact that a stressed brain can't learn?
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Okay, so we're going to attempt to experience our own affective networks at work. So on the next slide, I'm going to ask you to review a painting. And I want you to, once you see the painting, make a mental note of what object or person you notice first. And I will set a little timer so you know how long you have to view. So make a mental note of the object or person you notice first. Can you click the timer?
Sure.
Okay. So we're going to launch another poll. I want to know, what did you notice first? A, the man in the coat. B, the maid at the door. C, the child in white. Or D, none of these.
That would be D for me. I noticed the woman in the dark dress first.
Oh. Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So you probably noticed that there's a variation amongst the whole group about what they saw first. For me, the man in the coat is what I saw first. But Eric, you said that the woman in black was what you saw first.
Yeah, that's right. In the front center part.
So this variability is really key here. Our life experiences influence what we see and what we see first and how we see it. So for example, if I were a parent, the children might be the first thing that I see. Oh,
Sorry, I did that.
oh, that's okay.
There you go.
Well, we're going on to that slide anyway. So when you're looking at the framework for providing multiple means of engagement, I encourage you to ask yourself what options could be added to recruit interest of the learners in the goal. What options could be added to support learning to sustain effort and persistence in working toward a goal? And what options could be added to support learners to self-regulate during an activity? Here are some strategies that can provide success in the multiple means of engagement: offering flexible workspaces, providing mastery-oriented feedback, being very specific about the feedback that we're providing, and then promoting growth mindset with both students and staff. Okay, we're moving on to the recognition networks, neural networks. Our expectations of what we are seeing can warp what we do see. Contextual factors have been shown to have strong influence on perception and recognition. Different representations are recognized in different parts of the brain. So for example, if you look at the scan below, or at the bottom of the slide, you see the part of the brain that lights up when you're hearing words compared to the part of the brain that lights up when you're seeing words. So we're going to experience our neural network at work, our recognition network at work. So Eric, can you describe that image that you see there?
Sure. I see a checkerboard and a green cylinder in the upper left-hand corner.
Great. And then I don't know if you noticed this, but there's two boxes. One has an A and one has a B. And I would describe those as having a dark gray and a light gray. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So that's what I see too. Oops. So when I draw a cover over so that all you can see is the A and the B, we'll see what happens. So as I draw that cover, I see that those actually are the same colors. But when that cover is not there, my brain is telling me that that is a checkerboard.
Huh.
And some of you might be thinking, oh, this is just a trick on a computer. But believe me, I've printed this out and made my own cover, and it's crazy. But my brain is not passive. And we do not passively receive information. We are making connections based on prior knowledge. So that is your neural network, or your recognition network at work. Let's go back to this unexpected visitor. Here's another example. If we zoom in on the chair, our brains categorize this as a chair. That's actually pretty remarkable considering it doesn't have the characteristics of a typical chair. I think of a chair as having 4 legs. I don't see the legs, but my brain was able to make a connection. My brain might have also categorized it into a category of furniture. So your brains are making these connections without you even necessarily consciously realizing it. So to provide multiple means of representation, I might ask myself, what options could be added to ensure all learners can perceive the information? What options could be added to ensure all learners understand the language and symbols? And what options could be added to ensure all learners are able to comprehend the information? And here are some strategies that could provide success. You can embed Read and Write, which is an app that you can add to your Google toolbar if you're using Google products. There's also Immersive Reader, which is a Microsoft product. You could use the Frere model to help organize information. and using a Padlet, which you'll see an example of a Padlet at the end of this presentation, to help supply background knowledge if your students need additional background knowledge. So that is the multiple means of representation, or your recognition network. Now we're moving on to the strategic neural network. This is the part of your brain that helps us plan and organize and execute and monitor all kinds, oops, I see a spelling error, all kinds of purposeful acts in our environment, ranging from simple to complex tasks. They also allow, this is also where our executive functions are housed, essentially. So helping making plans for effective strategies or monitoring progress. When two people are confronted with the same problem, they may solve it in a different way using different patterns in their brain. So we're going back to the unexpected visitor one last time, I promise. This is it. And I'm going to ask you to review this painting another time, but this time, I'd like you to review this painting with this question in mind. What is the material circumstances of the family?
In other words, are they well-to-do? Are they living in poverty? That kind of thing?
Sure. It's purposely vague.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering. Do we want to craft a narrative around what this painting is?
So, I'm assuming, Eric, that you're employing a different strategy than the strategy the first time I asked you to review this painting. You might have changed the way that you searched the painting. So this painting was actually studied. They studied an individual's eye movement. So they did the same activity that you did. They did a free review, and then the second time they reviewed it, they reviewed it with the same question, the material circumstances of the family. And you can see from the eye pattern that the individual employed different strategies when they were reviewing it for a different reason. So even our eye movements vary depending on a task, and depending on the fact that the viewer had a different goal with each review of the painting. So that is an example of how we can see the strategic network at work. So if I'm planning, I might ask myself what options could be added to ensure learners can physically interact with the material and respond during an activity? What options could be added to ensure that all learners can express learning and communicate during an activity? And what options could be added to ensure that all learners are able to plan and organize their own learning? Some strategies here include the use of show me your card strategy. This is a strategy where students have different colored cards to gauge their mood and their feeling towards an activity. So a green card might mean that they're feeling really great about it. A yellow card might mean that they're feeling a little bit unsure, and a red card might mean that they really need some help. Using a Twitter-style exit slip to assess, helping students track the passage of time with perhaps a timer. So when we put it all together, we have these lovely, beautiful guidelines, and you read them from top to bottom and left to right. And when implemented, they help teachers provide access to the curriculum to build students' knowledge and capacity to internalize their learnings. This is all to bring students on the path to becoming an expert learner. So that brings us to the end of my part of this presentation, but before we switch it over to Q&A, I would like you to take 1 minute to create a tweet explaining your new catchy understanding of UDL. So it must be 280 characters or less, and you have multiple options to respond. You can create a real tweet and tag @edvoters, hashtag LEVinar UDL. You could record your response in a video and just save it for yourself, or you could write a reflection on a piece of paper or Post-it note, whatever you'd like to do, but take 1 minute to write a reflection, and we will have a timer. Actually, 1 minute and 10.
Okay. That was loud. I always like those visual timers. My son does well with those.
You're turning the closed captioning off. Fantastic. Thank you so much for engaging in that reflection. So I just would like to take a moment before I pass it to Eric to talk through some of the strategies that you might have noticed me use today. I tried to activate your prior knowledge with some of the activities and make some connections. We did a self-assessment at the beginning as well. In terms of representation, we have added closed captioning, which I meant to turn on at the beginning of the presentation, but I was a little bit frazzled. And then I also tried to color code, and I had pictorial representations. And then for action and expression, I implemented a visual timer, and I modeled for you how you might be able to progress monitor using the polling function of this presentation. So the digital resources that I have compiled for you are available at that bit.ly/UDL Padlet 19, or you could use the QR code. And that's an image of the resources that I've compiled for you. And my next slide is just Q&A. So I'll leave this up though during Q&A.
Sure.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely.
And I'm passing it back over to Eric.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Diana. I really appreciate the presentation. That was great information. And my son is on IEP, and so a number of those strategies that you laid out actually, I ironically have my parent-teacher conference next week, and guess what we're going to talk about?
Awesome.
Your timing was really good. All right, so we have about 10 minutes for questions. If you are wanting to send a question to us, type your question in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. No question is too basic. So I'd like to start with one right away, which is, what is CAST? I've heard you talk about it a few times, but I've never heard of CAST.
Oh, yes. So CAST is the Center for Assistive Technology, and what does that stand for? They actually, it's an acronym, but they universally go by CAST now. It's an organization that is in Massachusetts, and they were founded actually out of Harvard and spun off into their own organization as a nonprofit research entity.
Very cool, thank you. So we have a question here. It says, you've introduced UDL in curriculum design as a framework to illuminate and remove barriers, which very much makes it sound like a special education initiative, as opposed to focusing on UDL in curriculum design as a framework to create access and access points for all, which emphasizes UDL's utility and importance for all learners. Can you speak more on this choice of framing?
Sure, that's good feedback because I actually don't market this as a special education tool, or I try not to. This is beneficial for all learners, as the participant pointed out. So it's actually included in the Every Student Succeeds Act, and named as a priority within that. So it's a tool for general education.
Great, thank you. We have a question here, which is this webinar being recorded? I'd like to get a copy. I'm having a hard time keeping up. I have disabilities. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. And yes, we are recording this, and we will be posting the recording as well as the slides on the League of Education Voters website, which is educationvoters.org. I'll also be sending out a follow-up email that will have the link to the recording and the presentation slides. So you'll definitely get a copy of this. And thank you for bringing that up. So the question that I have too, Diana, is I'm understanding the concepts, and I'm wondering, I go back to the example you gave as the metamorphosis of a butterfly, for example. And I think about my own son who has difficulty writing. He really doesn't like writing for lots of reasons. And if there's other ways of showing mastery besides writing, then he'll tend to do much better. Mm-hmm. Is that basically the concept here, where if there's a lesson like spelling, for example, instead of having a student spell it out, is there a way of making spelling more accessible from the beginning as well? I'm just trying to think of multiple concrete uses of the UDL concept.
Yeah, well, in terms of, like, for example, a spelling assessment or a spelling activity, there could be multiple options within that lesson. So, for example, you might ask a student to spell out loud, but that might be a barrier to some students. So they would write their response, or maybe even type their response, but having multiple options to show what they know. You could also have letter cards, so they could create the word using cards that they spell out if you don't want to use a computer. There's lots of different ways that you can test the student's spelling without making them write. But that might be an option for some students.
Yeah, that helps. Great. So what are we were talking about barriers earlier. What do you see as the biggest barriers to implementing UDL? Is it just a lack of awareness, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to know is that most teachers already implement some of these strategies, you know. So I always recommend that you start small. So maybe you start with just engagement strategies, and then you build onto that. So I would say that one of the barriers is that I've heard is teachers saying, "Wow, that's a lot." The guidelines are a lot, but so my recommendation is to start small with that. And then I do think that while the awareness is growing, there's still a lot of work to be done around building awareness about this framework.
Great, yeah. In fact, we have a comment that says that I've heard the best way to get started is to remove just one barrier, which makes perfect sense. So we have another question here. I'd like to ask again, because I didn't catch it. Is the webinar being recorded or just the slides available? Please answer. Yes, I will answer privately, and I will say that yes, this will be available. Next question, are there already UDL curriculums out that people can buy and use?
No, not exactly. Not that I know of. So what I recommend is taking your curriculum, which are often already like research-based, and then spending your time and energy looking at the curriculum to see ways that you can remove barriers.
Great. So what can we do as parents, as advocates, as people within the educational system to have universal design be available universally?
Yeah, well, I think as parents, a lot of these strategies can be implemented at home. in terms of like helping your child stay motivated and become an expert learner, even if it's a task that's not really related to school or homework. So I think that there's applications outside of education. And then also, I mean, helping to build awareness. So like you were saying, you want to talk to your son's teacher about this framework also helps. So yeah.
Oh, this is great. I appreciate that. We're actually at time right now. So I really appreciate the presentation. I appreciate the information. I appreciate the questions and the polls and the interactivity of this, because this is, I think, one of the most comprehensive in terms of interactivity webinar that we've ever done.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, Diana, that was awesome. So our next webinar is going to be on the new graduation requirement rules that the State Board of Education finalized just recently. We don't have an exact date yet, but it'll likely be the 2nd or 3rd week of December. And once it is confirmed, we will post the information on our website and share on our Facebook page and on Twitter. Thank you to each of you who joined us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to info@educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, which is educationvoters.org. Please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. If you would like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, please visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you so much for attending, and we hope you will join us at future webinars.